Welcome, everyone. So glad that you can join us on our day 2 of Sharpen Your Intelligence series. Um, okay, let me share my screen and we'll begin with today's session. Okay, all right. So today we are going to look at nourishing the brain. We'll be looking at this today and tomorrow. There's a lot of information. I've tried to keep it succinct, and let's see how it goes. All right, so just to recap on what we went through yesterday, we are looking at 2 character traits every day, right? And yesterday, we looked at being curious. If we are not curious, we did a self test to see if we are curious or not, or mainly curious. It's a good thing to develop, right? Even if that's something that's not natural to us, we can develop it. Another character trait to develop to help sharpen our intelligence is to have a love for learning. Develop a love for learning. We also looked at the brain and saw that the frontal lobe is a seat of intelligence. And so throughout these entire series, we are going to look at what we can do to boost the brain entirely and specifically the function of frontal lobe. And then we also saw that there is something very simple that can enhance our intelligence, something that helps the production of the brain derived neurotrophic factor, which is a protein to help start and control new neural growth, right? And that is exercise, physical activity. And so we want to move because that is such a simple way to sharpen our intelligence. All right, so let's dig in with nourishing the brain. Now, just to look at some very basic neurotransmitters that are important for our context in these today and tomorrow. Of course, there are many neurotransmitters, at least 100 have been identified, and there are still some more neurotransmitters to be identified. What is a neurotransmitter? It is a signaling chemical that helps signals cross across the synapse, right? The synapse is the end of one neuron and the beginning of another neuron, or it could be another muscle cell, another gland cell, and there's a small gap in between. That's the synapse. And for communication to occur, these neurotransmitters pass on from one end of this neuron to the beginning of the other neuron or muscle cell or gland cell. But we are going to focus on 3 neurotransmitters, one being norepinephrine, the other being serotonin. We kind of looked at serotonin yesterday, and then dopamine. Now, serotonin in the brain helps maintain a happy feeling, and it keeps our mood under control by calming us down, and it promotes sound sleep, and it also helps relieve depression, helps out with us being patient. Now, we also have dopamine. Dopamine moves to the frontal lobe from the midbrain, and it is vital for performing balanced and control movements, but it's mostly known for pleasure, reward, motivation, and drive. And is all these neurotransmitters need to be in fine balance. When they are less, for example, if there's less dopamine, then it's so hard to be motivated to do anything. So for those who go through addictions, dopamine plays a huge role, right? Because there's this sense of pleasure that is derived from various substances or behaviors, and then people are seeking to get that same level of pleasure again and again. and get addicted. And the brain works amazingly. Like, for example, when dopamine is too much, there's just this surge, then what happens is that receptors at the synapse will shut off, and so they try to bring in balance. If there's too much of dopamine in the brain, it can lead to schizophrenia, right? So each one of these things, everything in our body, there's this fine balance that needs to be maintained. Also, something that another neurotransmitter that we'll be mentioning is norepinephrine. So norepinephrine and serotonin are linked to feelings of anxiety and depression. Norepinephrine is important to stay alert, to be energetic, and to focus. So I hope all of us have enough of norepinephrine right now to stay alert and focused on a presentation today, because there's going to be quite a bit of data. And so I invite you to tune in completely, grasp as much as you can, take down notes, screenshots, whatever you can do to retain this information. Well, now there are some amino acids called tryptophan and tyrosine. These amino acids are precursors to these neurotransmitters that we talked about. Tryptophan for serotonin, tyrosine for norepinephrine and dopamine. And so we want to make sure that, to have this overall well-balanced sense of feeling, to experience intelligence and cognition, that we have good levels of tryptophan and tyrosine. Now, tryptophan and tyrosine, they are labeled as large neutral amino acids, and we'll talk about that later. But there's a complex way that tryptophan and tyrosine get into the brain. All right. Now, our brain is protected by the blood-brain barrier, in short, BBB. These are a network of blood vessels and tissue that is made up of closely spaced cells, and it helps keep harmful substances away, most bacteria, most viruses, from reaching the brain. And it allows only certain substances, small molecules, to pass into the brain. Now, we are looking at tryptophan and tyrosine, right? Which are called large neutral amino acids. There are other amino acids also that are come under this category of large neutral amino acids. And all of these amino acids compete with tryptophan and tyrosine to get across the blood-brain barrier, and get into the brain, because it has to get into the brain for those neurotransmitters to be made available, right? And so it is very interesting that when there's a high amount of the other LNAs in the blood, tryptophan and tyrosine crossing into the blood-brain barrier decreases. Okay, so tryptophan and tyrosine, they occur in protein-rich foods as other amino acids, because amino acids are the basis of proteins, right? And so when proteins are broken down, that's what you get. But what has been seen is that there might be a lot of tryptophan and tyrosine in the blood, like if you test the blood. But if there's also other large neutral amino acids in the blood, you're going to have less tryptophan and less tyrosine in the brain. So then what does that mean? All those good things that serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine bring to our brain for well-being, for intelligence, for calmness and whatnot, is going to be very unlikely. And people can land up experiencing depression, anxiety. We don't want that happening, do we? So, um, there are foods that have higher ratio of tryptophan or tyrosine um, compared to other foods and amino acids. So, some of these foods that help us not only have enough of tryptophan and tyrosine in the blood, but also help get it into the brain are chia seeds, grapes, sweet potato, raw cauliflower, flax seeds, seaweed, specifically spirulina, pumpkin seeds, peanuts, wheat that is just germinated, almonds, soybeans, and sun-dried tomatoes. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind that these foods really make tryptophan and tyrosine easily available to the brain compared to a lot of protein rich foods. And we'll talk about that. Um, Sometimes, we've heard, hey, of different diets that either go very low on carbs or totally eliminate carbs. You have the keto diet, the paleo diet, there are fads these days. But here's some facts about carbs and stress. First of all, it's common sense. Glucose is the fuel that drives neurons. Okay, so for our brain to work, we need glucose. So glucose intake has also been associated with enhanced mental performance. Now, what we don't want happening is we don't want sudden spikes of glucose in our blood. What we want happening is an increase of glucose that continues to stay steady, and then in time it will drop down, and that's time to get a next dose of glucose through our meals. The best way to have the steady supply of glucose is to eat complex carbohydrates. Um, so you need things that are unrefined, and we'll come to that soon. Now, there have been studies to see what happens when people are put under stressful situations and you don't give them carbs or you give them carbs. So there was a study that had the experimental group and control group. The experimental group was given a drink of carbohydrates and put under stress, and the other group wasn't given the same, right? What was noticed that stress significantly increased cortisol, which is a marker for stress. It is a hormone that's released when we are stressed out. Okay, so it increased cortisol and reduced mood and cognitive performance, right? So that was what happened. And the study showed that carbohydrates significantly increased plasma to the LNAA ratio and positively influenced performance and mood under stress, right? So an outcome of stress is that you have high cortisol levels, reduced mood and cognitive performance. But when we have sufficient amount of carbohydrates, which helps retain the tryptophan from the blood into the brain, it influences to perform well cognitively, and also moods are much better under stress. So highly stressed people should be having sufficient carbohydrates in their diet. So we have to really choose our carbohydrates and proteins wisely, and the ratio of carbohydrates and proteins. So typically a healthy plate would look like 1/4 of the plate are your unrefined grains, right? 1/4 of your plate is proteins, and the rest vegetables and some fruit. Okay, so if we are eating a whole food plant-based diet, we will get good carbohydrates. Now that doesn't mean I over binge on on unrefined grains. No, I everything stays in balance, right? So eat enough of whole grains, one fourth of what you consume, keep that to whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Healthy protein options are legumes, soybeans, tofu, vegetables, grains. Also, you get it from nuts and seeds. Now, a lot of people don't think that we can get protein from grains, nuts, and seeds. We can get some amount, but there are grains like millets, like quinoa, that are protein rich. And so those are good options. So we want to make sure that we are not eliminating carbohydrates from our diets. We want to make sure that they are there, because it has been seen that if people maintain a higher carb, low protein ratio diet, that improves the ability of tryptophan to get into the brain blood barrier and therefore increases the serotonin that's available in the brain, which makes our brain better, function better, right? So this is a very delicate balance and is something that, if at all you take away one thing, that you take away this. Keep a good proportion of carbs to the rest of the food that you are eating. If you're on a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet, it's difficult to go wrong. Okay, as long as you're eating in a balanced way. Well, the next important essential nutrient for our brain is vitamin B1, also called as thiamine, and it is very essential for the optimal working of our brain and the entire nervous system. Now, uh, thiamine deficiency can take place, especially it has been noticed in countries that depend on polished rice as a staple. Now, do you know of any country that does that? I wonder. We do it a lot, don't we? In our country, we have been depending a lot on polished rice, which has led to a lot of health issues. But also remember that it is a problem if we don't have enough of thiamine. It affects our intelligence. Another cause for thiamine deficiency is when there's alcohol dependence, right? People get addicted to alcohol. That reduces the body's ability to absorb thiamine. And so we want to make sure that we are eating whole grain, especially, the bran around grains, that is rich in thiamine. And so brown rice, again, legumes, flax seeds, pistachio nuts, they are rich in vitamin B1. Another B family vitamin, pyridoxine or vitamin B6, is also important. Now, there is an amino acid called homocysteine. Now, if there's a high level of homocysteine in the blood, that's not healthy. There has to be a balance, but high levels of homocysteine can lead to depression and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And this happens, one of the reasons this happens is that because there's a deficiency of pyridoxine or vitamin B6. And so we need this to maintain decent levels of homocysteine in the blood. Now, pyridoxine is also essential in the process to produce serotonin. There's an entire process, and there are many things that serotonin is dependent on to get produced, and one of those things is vitamin B6. And we saw tryptophan is a precursor. Now, animal-based diets may require a supplementation of vitamin B6. Healthy sources are potatoes with skin, baked, boiled, bananas, raw spinach, and other green leafy vegetables, watermelon, papaya, oranges, cashew nuts, peanuts, and dal. Okay, what's next on our list? Vitamin B9 or folate. Now, folate is so important for cognitive performance, and it also helps reduce inflammation, which is very essential to have good health. So it has also been shown that when pregnant women don't have enough of folate, um, and their homocysteine levels are out of whack, it can affect the intellectual development of the fetus. So pregnant women should be consuming enough of folate. Oh, it's pretty easy to get folate. If you're eating greens often, then you're going to get your dose of folate. Also, it's there in legumes, the peas, the dal, the gram, peanuts, lady's finger tomatoes, sunflower seeds, and also in citrus fruits along with vitamin C, you get folate, right? All right, so the next one in the B family is vitamin B12 and which is also called as cobalamin. This is so important for neurological health. The neurons, like the axon, there is a sheath that covers it called the myelin sheath, and that helps to keep, the electrical impulses that are passing from just going all out, right? It's like this insulation, right? We have wires and we have insulators around the wires so that the current can pass from the right end and reach the right end. So similarly with the neurons, if B12 is not there, that's one place that can be affected. And in general, for neurons to be healthy, you need B12. Now, B12 can be found in animal-based food, meat and dairy, and to some extent in eggs as well. But what we are seeing is that the best diet is a whole food, plant-based diet. And so it is kind of tricky, given that you have these facts existing, to how do you get B12 for someone who's following a whole food plant-based diet. But there have been studies that have shown, okay, we'll come to that. There have been studies that have shown that when you use organic fertilizers like cow dung to grow plants, the plants will have B12. So cow dung or fermented poultry fertilizers, those are some ways to get B12. But the wisest recommendation from lifestyle medicine experts are to follow a whole food plant-based diet and to include regular B12 supplementation. Okay, so B12 supplementation, it's best that it started before the middle age, because after that, the body starts kind of resisting sometimes absorption of B12, and so you want to start making sure that you have enough of B12. And a good advice is for anyone above 30 to have frequent blood tests and make sure that your B12 levels are good. If you don't have sufficient B12 levels, that's going to negatively impact your neurons big time. It can also cause different things. You will start feeling lack of energy, BP can start dropping, you get disoriented. And so if you've never checked your B12 levels, I would highly recommend set an appointment and get your blood tested for B12. Okay. All right. So that's with the B family. The next is choline. Now, choline is needed to develop another neurotransmitter that's called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is very much needed for cholinergic neural networks that are associated with memory. And specific studies have shown that when there is choline present in the body, the person's visual memory and verbal memory increases. Again, with pregnant women, choline levels can affect the brain development in the fetus. So it's again another important nutrient for everybody. Some good healthy sources of choline are quinoa, spinach, amaranth, beetroot, soybean, whole grain wheat flour, flaxseed, cauliflower. And I'm just mentioning a few. Like there's so many vegetables, so many fruits, so many seeds and grains that you can get these different nutrients from. Okay, so that's with our nutrients for today. So what we had looked at was we really need tryptophan, tyrosine, and we that is needed for serotonin. You can get that from various sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, green leafy vegetables. We also looked at various B family vitamins that are really needed for the brain to maintain good health for the neurons and also for cognitive function, right? All right. And so, as we said, that every day we are going to also look at two character traits to develop. And here's our first character trait for the day, creativity. Now, when you look at, all these foods that now you're thinking, okay, I know now these foods need to be consumed by me, or if I'm, the one responsible at home for cooking meals, then hey, creativity comes into play, isn't it? Same thing for any other behavior change that you want to make. You need creativity. And creativity also spices up life. It makes it enjoyable. All right, so let's test ourselves and see how creative we are. All right, so you look at each of the statements and you can choose whether it applies to you. Do you strongly disagree, just disagree, you're neutral, you agree or strongly agree? And remember what you are choosing for each of these questions. Okay, so we have 4 questions for creativity. I am not worried about looking foolish to others. Or are you? What do you choose? What is right for you? I do not avoid activities that are a little frightening or challenging. Some activities may, be totally not our thing, but then some things that, we think are kind of okay, but still something about trying it is frightening, or we think it may be challenging. I don't want to waste my time. Okay, third one. I enjoy trying to find a newer or better way of accomplishing something. Maybe something works already, but do you try to optimize to get whatever it is working faster, or maybe that's an easier way to do it, or do it in a way that can have much more positive impact and you can enjoy doing it? The last one, I have already created original inventions that are useful to myself and others. Have you ever created something that is original. As I was typing this down, I was like, really? What have I done? What have I contributed? Anything that's original? And as I thought, I was like, sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. I have at least created certain recipes from scratch, healthy recipes that were my original invention, um, and is beneficial to my family. So just think about it. You may think that, oh, nothing to physics, oh, nothing to maths, but you would have done something. And make sure you take, that you recognize that you do have creativity and you do bless others with your creativity. Okay, so what have you chosen? If you have agreed mostly to these questions, then the likelihood of you being a creative person is strong. If not, hey, it's time to get creative to be creative. Okay, think about what fields interest you and what are some things that you can start doing. Maybe it starts off learning what is already there, and that's a good place to start then making something new. The next character trait for today is hopefulness. Hope hope keeps us going on. Are you a hopeful person, an optimistic person, or are you a pessimistic person? Let's see. Okay, the first statement. Despite challenges, I nearly always remain hopeful of the future. Challenges come to everyone, right? But do you stay hopeful of the future, or do you question whether there's anything for you? I think that for the last 1 month, I've been pretty hard on myself and pretty negative because there were some things in my studies that I was not accomplishing, and time is going. I need to finish it to graduate. And I remember that quite a few of the mornings that I got up, I was just saying so many negative things to myself. But by the grace of God, He has intervened. And hey, these days I get up and I say positive things to myself. And now things look hopeful. What about you? What is your kind of speech to yourself? What is your self-talk? Is it positive or is it negative? If it is negative, make an effort to say things that are positive to yourself, and it makes a difference. It really does. Okay, the next one. I believe that good will eventually triumph over evil. Or are you constantly looking at how evil is just having its way in today's world? So much of violence, so much of greed. Maybe people haven't been treating you nicely. And does it just seem that there's no good? What do you believe? Even if you're going through a situation that just seems bad is overtaking good. What do you believe? I expect the best. Do you expect the best? If you expect the best, um, that's when you will put in your best. Okay, that's an easy one. I have a clear picture of what I want to happen in the future. And it doesn't have to be specific, it can be broad, right? A kind of broad picture. Do you know where you're going ultimately? What is it that you're pursuing? Or are you just flowing with the tide? The last one, if I get negative feedback from someone, I focus on how to do better in the future. And this is a good trait. This is something good to have, if we don't have, it's good to develop. Because it's so easy for our egos to be hurt when we get negative feedback. But if we can just say, okay, hold on emotions, frontal lobe taking over, and yes, let's focus on how to do this better next time. So, what were your answers? If you agreed to most of these 5 questions, then you are a hopeful person. If you've disagreed, you need to start doing things to set your mind to be in an optimistic frame. One thing is move around optimistic, positive people. Have friends, have mentors who are positive, right? And then, as mentioned before, when you talk to yourself, talk positive, say positive things. And these tiny things will go a long way. Make sure what you're reading, what you're listening, they're all positive, optimistic, right? Everything that enters, if it is optimistic, if it is positive, if it is hopeful, that will influence you to also be a hopeful person. So, creativity and hopefulness, all right, those are character traits for today. So, I just want us to think about, we've been talking about different things to different nutrients for our brain to perform better. And if you've noticed something, there's just this diversity in food. We could have been just created to have just limited food, or there could have been just one food or two foods and everything, all the nutrients in it. But that's not the way creation has been made, right? There is diversity in everything. And that shows that, whoever created us has goodwill towards us, loves us, wants us to enjoy. But that is also challenging us to be creative. Now you have all this diversity. You have to be creative in what you choose to eat or whatever action you have to perform. But today we are specifically talking about eating. And also fills us with hope that, with such diversity, that we have a good creator and that our future then should be one that is hopeful. That would be the creator's wish for us. And we can see it in everyday evidences around us. So this is my thought to leave you with for today. And we are done with part 1 of Nourishing Our Brain. Tomorrow we will look at more nutrients, and we'll also look at some things that are essential for our brain to perform well. We don't exactly get them from food. We get them from other ways, but they have to get into our body. And so we look at that. And also we'll talk about some things that are not good for our body, that should stay, that we should refrain from, we should completely avoid. Okay, so thank you all for listening.